Abomination of Desolation, as it's called. There is one place in Daniel where it's called the transgression of desolation. So I just called it desolation instead of picking one or the other, abomination or transgression. They both give the same idea. And what exactly is this desolation? And I personally think it's tied to the trampling of the holy underfoot. So if we go to Daniel 8, verse 13, we read, "How long will the vision be concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot?" That word daily, we'll come to that on the next slide and discuss it a little bit. But this is what Yeshua refers to in, that's recorded for us in Matthew, Mark, and Luke in his prophetic Olivet discourse right before his crucifixion during that last week of his life. He says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet," Daniel does use the word abomination elsewhere, just not in the Daniel 8:13 verse I just shared. So he says, "When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." And Luke also puts it a little bit differently, adding a little bit more of the wording of Yeshua. He says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." So Luke gives us kind of this context of, Jerusalem being surrounded by armies is kind of the physical sign to look for that the abomination of desolation is on the doorstep. So what we see is we see the daily, the desolation, Jerusalem's conquest, and Daniel's time prophecies, I believe, are all linked. All right? So let's start with the daily. And that in Hebrew is the Tamid. And I believe every aspect of sanctuary services, not just sacrifice, encompassed the daily or the Tamid, which represented kind of a continual daily communion of believers with the Creator. So in most verses and translations in the Bible, when it says the daily in Daniel, they add the word sacrifices, but that word is not found in the original Hebrew. And so it's a rather misleading translation, and it leads to a whole bunch of problematic interpretations in futurism. And in that school of thought, they hang a lot on that one interpretation of it being daily sacrifices, and yet the word's not there, right? But they believe that the temple has to be rebuilt, sacrifices reinstituted, and in a very physical sense in Jerusalem. But there's so much more to the word Tamid. So if you do a word study on Tamid and you go back and you look at all the places where it shows up, you'll find that it's not just sacrifices that occurred at Tamid, but also the priests were to wash before entering the sanctuary. So every time they go in to do sacrifices, they're washing. So washing is an integral part of Tamid, even though the specific word isn't used there in Exodus 30, verse 20. But it is used in many other areas that had to do with the sanctuary service. Says that in Exodus 25, "And you shall eat the showbread on the table before me always," or tamid. So we see the word translated in various different ways, but so putting out of the bread and the eating of the bread on the table of showbread in the sanctuary was something that was done daily or always, continually. And so that was, another option for translating the prophecy in Daniel is, instead of sacrifices, why not putting out the daily bread? In Exodus 27, "And you shall command the children of Israel that they bring you pure oil of pressed olives for the light to cause the lamp to burn continually." So they're always cleaning and lighting the menorah. So why not use that word instead of sacrifices, right? And when Aaron lights the lamps at twilight, he shall burn incense on it. So on the golden altar of incense in front of the most holy, a perpetual or a tamid incense before Yahweh throughout your generations in Exodus 30. So there's all these things. In fact, every single aspect, piece of furniture in the sanctuary can be tied to the tamid and having some kind of daily service done on it. So it's much more than just sacrifices that are encompassed by the tamid. So what does it mean when the daily is taken away? Is it just sacrifices ceasing, or is it pointing us to something bigger? I think it's pointing us to a deeper meaning, because we recall that the sanctuary is just about pointing us to something deeper, right? It's a physical, tangible, something that the Israelites did as a way of learning a deeper meaning. So what is that deeper meaning? Well, in order to kind of tease that out, what we need to do is we need to look at each of the things that the different pieces of furniture represented in the sanctuary and figure out then that deeper meaning from that. So when you look at the table of showbread and the fact that they were to put bread on it daily, so let's look at the words of Yeshua, quoting Deuteronomy 8 verse 3, and found in Matthew 4 verse 4, where it says, "But he, Yeshua, answered and said, It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of Yahweh." So here we have the bread being put out daily, representing the word of God that must be eaten and digested daily. But his delight is in the Torah of Yahweh, and in his Torah he meditates day and night. Again, the word of God is something that's to be meditated on. And this, it says day and night in Psalms 1, right? So that's continually. That twice a day reference is a reference to the Tamid there. Isaiah 60, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of Yahweh is risen upon you." So here we see the light of the menorah is actually representative of, you know, um, the glory of Yahweh. And I'm sorry, that should say your light has come, not you light has come. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it, right? We have to be continually in the presence, taking in the light of God each day as part of that daily service. And there's a whole lot more as far as tying every an article of the sanctuary, and you can think about daily sacrifice. Paul says, I take up your cross daily, right? To deny yourself, to sacrifice, all these things. David talks about sacrifices of praise. All these things are tied in. So instead of kind of using this kind of linear, two-dimensional proof text where we go, okay, Tamid is related to sacrifice, therefore we're going to interpret this as the sacrifice is being taken away in Daniel. That's what the abomination of desolation is. We need to go, wait a second, it's not just one thing that Tamid is tied to, it's this whole network of things. So we have Tamid kind of like a single node in your brain, like a single neuron, right? But it's connected to all these other neurons. So the Tamid is connected to incense, right? And as we talked about on Yom Kippur, incense is representative of prayer, right? You have the showbread, which itself is connected to taking in the scripture and the word of God, right? And you have sacrifice, and you have the light and the washing, which is the purification that we obtain when we spend more time in the Word. Right. So all of these things, to me, really is connected to the hidden thing, the deeper meaning, the big thing it's connected to is our relationship with our Creator. So when Daniel sees that the Tamid is taken away, it's not the sacrifices, physical sacrifices in the temple that he's seeing. He's seeing that there's something that's coming between people and their relationship with their Creator. And of course, if you don't have a relationship with your Creator, that would lead you to feel very desolate, which is why it's called the abomination of desolation. So throughout history, we're in a conflict between good and evil. Throughout history, it has been Satan's main object ever since the garden to try and sever that connection and that daily walk with God and prevent humanity from being able to walk in that, to walk with our Creator. And he has done that through the agent of the King of the North. So here we're bringing in Daniel chapter 11 now, talking about the King of the North, okay? The King of the North, as the agent of Satan on earth, seeks to desolate relationship with the Creator, okay? Setting up a replacement system of worship and limiting freedom of conscience, okay? So the the king of the north has changed names throughout history. Okay, you have Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. You have the Assyrians, and you have the Babylonians. And we've talked about this in our last topic, right? From the Babylonians, it goes to the Persians and the Greeks, the Romans, and from the pagan Roman Empire, it transitioned into the papal Roman Empire throughout the Dark Ages. And there's no reason to believe that it couldn't transition again in name, but not character. Right. And so I kind of take a little bit of an exception to a lot of the um, anti-Catholic cancel culture prevalent among Adventists, where we have to, demonize the Pope, because that's kind of past history at this point. We don't know if the King of the North at the time of the end will keep the title Pope, right? He could have a new title. The title's not what we should be focusing on. The name isn't what we should be focusing on. We need to be focusing on the characteristics, which is the changing of the system of worship and limiting of freedom of conscience. Both of those things take away from the Tamid. Okay, so we see tests coming to Daniel and his friends to kind of give an example and teach us about these things. The first test for Daniel and his friends was in clean foods. What are you going to put into your Bible, into your body, right? Test again occurred again during the Greek Seleucids for the Jewish nation when they were persecuted if they wouldn't eat pork. Okay, and the test I think came recently as well for us as a global community with the Fauci ouchie, the jab, right? What are you going to put in your body? And if you don't go along with what everyone says you need to put in your body, then you get persecuted, ostracized, excluded from the community, right? And so we see that pattern of that testing about your health, right? Because if you don't have good health, you can't have a good relationship with the Creator, right? If you're not following um, his laws that optimize your brain and allow you to think rationally and logically and clearly with good health, then that impacts your relationship with him, right? So that's one way. And that I think is the first test that comes. Second test then comes, I believe, in regard to prayer, directly assaulting the Tamid or the daily. And it was done when Babylon tested Daniel's three friends, right? You have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the fiery furnace because they would not bow down and pray to the golden statue, right? Daniel's test came a little later. It didn't come under the Babylonian king of the north. It came under the Persian king of the north, right? When his friend Darius made a decree that you shall not worship anyone or pray to anyone but the king for 30 days. Daniel, of course, honored the daily prayers. He would open up his window and pray 3 times a day. At the times when the Tamid was performed in the sanctuary, he would pray at those times. And of course, he got thrown into a lion's den because of it. Okay. The Greco-Roman Empire tested Jews and early Christians alike, okay, in regards to worship, right? The emperor styled himself the Son of God. You had to offer incense for the emperor, pray to the emperor, right? By claiming Son of God, he was really claiming dominion of the entire world as the heir of Adam, right? Adam was the original Son of God. When Augustus claimed that title, Son of God, he was claiming dominion of the world by being a son of Adam, therefore a son of God. So this concept was not strange in the world at the time to take that world dominion title, right? And yet Jesus comes along and he's the rightful son of God, the rightful ruler of this world, okay? And he's, of course, persecuted as well and killed because of, because of our sins, right? So when it talks in Daniel 7:25 about this power, this king of the north, intending to change times and laws, the word used there for times is the word zaman, which I actually have an app on my phone, and it's called the Zaman Times. And it gives the times when Jewish prayers are offered. So Jews still to this day refer to the prayers that they offered daily to Tamid at the same time that the temple sacrifices were performed. They still refer to those as zemanim, okay, in plural. So this reference to times, plural, is not just about one time, the Sabbath, or the yearly festivals, but it's also even about the daily prayer times that are sought, that the King of the North seeks to change. So let's dive back into Daniel 11. We talk about the pattern of Daniel 11. What do we see, right? We see over and over again throughout history, you've got the king of the south and the king of the north, and these are oppositional forces on either side of Jerusalem, with Jerusalem stuck in the middle. Okay. We see that the Jews end up making an alliance with the king of the north. Whether it's a verbal alliance, as it was during the time of the Maccabees, or whether it's a de facto alliance by the fact that King Josiah went and attacked Pharaoh. Regardless, the side that is chosen by the Jews is the king of the north. Okay, but it doesn't work out well for them, because we know that not too long after Josiah decided to side with the king of the north and go against Egypt, that Babylon eventually came in and conquered Jerusalem, trampled on it. All right, you had persecution of the remnant in Jerusalem, and the temple was destroyed. Okay, we see that same pattern happen again. An alliance is made with Rome, actually, and eventually it results in the Roman destruction of the temple. And what happens ultimately, though, is the king of the north loses the war, right? That's the end of the story. And so that's the good news, right? Is that our Creator still has power over these events here on Earth. So there was actually an alliance. So when we had all these battles going on, right? You had the Battle of Gaugamela, which is when the Greeks took over from the Persians. You had the Battle of Magnesia, which is when the Romans kind of told the Greeks, we're the new power. You're going to listen to us. But then in yellow, I have the battles of Carchemish, Panium, and Pelusium. Okay, stretching kind of north-south there along the Holy Land. These are battles that were won by the King of the North. And Raphia in blue, a battle that was won by the King of the South. So Carchemish would have been when Pharaoh Necho and Nebuchadnezzar fought. Nebuchadnezzar won. Okay, yes. All right. Panium and Pelusium, battles in the later between the Greek Seleucids and the Ptolemies, Raphia, okay, during the time just prior to 161 BC, from around like 200 to this time. So there's this constant warfare north to south going on with Jerusalem stuck in the middle. So what do? They go off to Rome and they make an alliance with Rome. The Maccabees do. And it's recorded in the book of First Maccabees chapter 8 for us. And I'm not gonna read it. You can go and read it for yourself, but it's a mutual defense pact that the Jews had with Rome. Not sure why they needed to defend Rome. Rome seems pretty capable of defending itself, but I think that's just the way treaties go, right? I give you something, you give me something, even if it is a little one-sided. So there was an alliance with Rome. So what should we expect from the pattern? We should expect that eventually Rome will come in and destroy Jerusalem, which they did. Okay, so we're talking about the fall of Jerusalem. This is now after the time of Christ, so a little bit longer time span between when they made an alliance with Rome and when Jerusalem was destroyed than it happened with. It was only like 24 years, I think, between the time that King Josiah was killed when he went against Pharaoh Necho and the destruction of Jerusalem when Babylon conquered it. Here we've got a little more time, right? We're talking about 161 BCE to 66 AD. Okay, so a couple hundred years. But in the fall, specifically the fall of 66 AD, Roman armies commanded by Cestus Gallus, they first surround Jerusalem, and then they withdrew. Okay, but the early Christians took that as a sign, the sign that Luke talked about when you see Roman armies or when you see armies surrounding Jerusalem, right? Get out, flee to the mountains. So where do they go? What are their options, right? To the west is the Mediterranean Sea. That's not where Jesus said to go. To the north is the plains of Galilee. That's not where Jesus said to go. It's very flat up there, north of the West Bank. To the south is the desert, the Negev. That Jesus didn't say go to the desert, right? So the only other option is to the east, um, into the mountains of Jordan as a place of refuge. And yet at that time, so in blue on the map here is the area that was controlled by Jewish rebels. Okay, so they controlled directly to the east of Jerusalem through kind of some of that region of Decapolis. Not all of Decapolis, but kind of the southern part of the Decapolis. And so, in order to get out of the area that's under the control of Jerusalem, they had to leave that area. And that meant going to the Decapolis city of Pella. All right, which is so it's not just to the east that they fled, it's to the northeast that they fled. And we'll come back to the idea of northeast again in Daniel chapter 11 here in a little while. So they flee, okay, and exactly 3.5 years later, interesting time period, right? 3.5 years later, Titus's army returns and destroys Jerusalem, but there's no Christians there. They've fled. They've reestablished themselves in Pella. Okay, so they're saved. Okay, they escaped as a remnant because they saw the warning sign and got out. And so it's a time of Passover that Jerusalem is again. They lay siege to it and end up destroying Jerusalem. All right, so let's talk about parallel prophecies then. We've got Daniel 7 and 8, 11, 12. We know those are Daniel's prophecies kind of build on each other, getting a little more detailed each time. Okay. And you've got Revelation 11, 12, 13, which are the parallels to that. So in Daniel 7, we see a terrible strong beast with 10 horns. Revelation 13, again, a beast with 10 horns. In Revelation 13, a couple of verses later, that beast receives a deadly wound. Okay. You have the beast, the whole world marvels and follows the beast in Revelation, has authority over every tribe and nation. In Daniel, it devours the whole earth, overthrows many countries. Okay. In Revelation, it trods the holy city underfoot. And in Daniel, it also talks about trampling the temple, but it also says it grows towards the glorious land, pitches a tent by the glorious holy mountain. Okay. You see the speaking of blasphemies in both of those, Daniel being a little more specific, talking about the taking away of the Tamid. See persecution with the saints in both of these prophecies. You see that there's another beast that helps it, right? In Daniel, it says it doesn't act by its own power. It doesn't really describe that other beast. In Revelation, it does. It talks about the beast that, a second beast that makes everyone worship the image, the first beast. Okay. And in Daniel, it talks about a trampling for 3.5 years, or a time, times, and half a time. Okay. In Revelation, you've got a 1260-day period, 42-month period, and times, and half a time again. Okay, so parallel time period. End of the story, right? The beast in Daniel's given to the burning flames. Revelation is cast in the lake of fire, right? And we all know this. If you've been around in the Adventist system long enough, you know all these parallels, right? But the one that's not talked about is that deadly wound, right? Where is the deadly wound in Daniel? If everything else is parallel, we should be able to find a parallel to the deadly wound in Daniel. And I think we do. I think that's in Daniel 11:40, where we stopped right before Daniel 11:40. We're going to pick it up with Daniel 11:40, where it talks about the king of the north receiving a goring. Okay. So let's dive into that. This goring, okay. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. Daniel 11, verse 40. But that word attack, okay, is the only place in Scripture where this particular Hebrew word is translated as attack. Everywhere else, it's really in the context of horned animals. And the Hebrew word is nagash. It means to push, thrust against, or collide with, to gore. Okay, and gorings are deadly wounds. Bullet holes are very survivable, right? You get a little bullet hole in your body somewhere, maybe not vital. Okay, your body can heal up from that, unless it goes through your heart or your brain or cuts a major artery. Bullet holes you can survive from, right? Um, Again, other forms of bodily injury tend to be very survivable. Gorings do not tend to be survivable. If you get gored in the leg, that is a massive horn. It's most likely going to sever an artery. You're going to bleed out. If it goes into a lung, the hole is so big, you're not going to survive that. Okay, so this is a picture of Victor Barrio, a Spanish bullfighter who was killed in 2016 from a goring just right into his ribs. Okay, it's a deadly wound. And so, okay, should we translate this attack or should we translate it goring? I say let's go with goring because we have Deuteronomy where it talks about Joseph. His glory is like a firstborn bull. With his horns like the horns of a wild ox, he shall push the peoples or gore the peoples, right? The strength of Joseph represents the power. Ezekiel, it's a God's telling he's going to judge between the fat and the lean sheep, right? Because you have pushed with side and shoulder, butted all the weak ones with your horns. Okay, kind of a tame word, butted in English, right? But in the original Hebrew, and these are nasty sheep. They're goring the other sheep. Okay. Um, and of course in Daniel, we have the ram and the goat, right? And the ram is seen with two horns, one horn a little higher than the other, and the higher one came up last, and he saw the ram pushing. Now, so many of the words in the Bible are kind of tamed down, right? It's not pushing, it's goring westward, northward, and southward. Okay, he is militarily taking over, right? Inflicting major wounds. And we know that the ram conquered three empires, right? Lydia, which is Turkey, Babylon, and Egypt. Okay, westward, northward, southward. And that's not a kind just kind of push, right? That's a military goring. So this is a very significant thing. When those nations received this goring, they really were killed. They were dead. They were not coming back, right? Babylon didn't come back in anything but a symbolic sense, right? After Persia took over, because gorings are deadly wounds. Okay, so some examples of, I think, gorings in modern warfare, I think would have to be things that are penetrating wounds well past outer defenses. I mean, this is not something that's superficial, right? A goring. So think dropping nuclear bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, well behind the front lines. Think a terrorist attack on the World Trade Centers, well behind the front lines, right? These drone attacks that are happening in Ukraine now and Yemen, and the hypersonic missiles that are being used, right? These are things that can inflict major, massive wounds, kind of deep into enemy territory. Space-based weapons, fire from heaven, these are all things that maybe could cause a goring. So every time the king of the south, singular, right? It's not kings of the south, it's king of the south, is mentioned in Daniel 11. This was our talk last time. That every time in Daniel 11 we have a king of the south, it's always the king of Egypt. Okay. We don't have a king, singular king of the south right now. Yeah, there's a king in Saudi Arabia, but that's not the king of Egypt. Neither does it control the Islamic world. Okay, and we've talked about how we have these three phases of conflict in Daniel 11 that are seen. You have the phase of the Arab Crusades, then you had the Ottoman and Venetian, and the well, really the Holy Roman League, um, in the around the time of the Reformation, right? The Battle of Lepanto. Okay, and then you had a future one in Daniel 11:40 through 45. Okay, so in each of these three phases, we've got kind of this major caliphate, right, pushing against Christendom. Currently, there is no caliphate, certainly not one based in Egypt. The Islamic world is very divided. So I think that we are still looking for this a king singular, and yes, I do believe it will be an actual monarchy, not just a political system, because Daniel's very specific when he talks about commanders versus kings in Daniel chapter 11. Okay, so I do believe it will be king. I do believe it will be based in Egypt. I think that is what we are looking for as the final piece of the stage getting set before this prophecy can actually be fulfilled in a literal way. Okay. Remember, there are queens that are mentioned in Daniel chapter 11. So again, it has to be men heading a monarchy. Greek democracy was in its infancy during the time of Daniel, but nonetheless, it was there. He could have said a democracy. He could have been specific on the type of government, but he wasn't. He said monarchy. So I think we need to stick to the plain words of Scripture and just wait for it to happen, right? Try not to read too much into the current news. Wait until the current news matches the prophecy, right? So Islamic eschatology. I want to kind of introduce you to this a little bit. I've studied it a bit, okay? I've got a couple of quotes here by a couple of guys who are now dead, all right? These are guys who are, at least in the case of Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, he was associated with ISIS, okay, Islamic State. And this is a quote from him from 2014 saying, "And so we promise you, speaking to the Crusaders, we will conquer your Rome, break your crosses, and enslave your women." And then Yusuf Salome in an address at Al-Aqsa, the Temple Mount, in just 2020, said, "The messenger of Allah," speaking of Muhammad, was asked, which of the two cities will be opened first, or open to the Muslims, surrender to the Muslims first, conquered by them? Constantinople or Rome? Rasulullah, just meaning the messenger in Arabic of Allah, said, the city of Heraclius, okay, which was the ancient name for, was kind of the way that Constantinople was known in that part of the world. They called it Heraclius, okay? The city of Heraclius will be opened first, meaning Constantinople. The first conquest of Constantinople has taken place, and the second conquest of Rome, Italy, will be achieved, Allah willing, as it is inevitable, truly, and certainly. Okay, this is Islamic. This is their eschatology, as they believe they will conquer Rome, per the words of Muhammad, or the alleged words of Muhammad. Okay. And there's a whole lot more really interesting information about this. But if you think about their design to attack Rome, an attack from Islam to Rome, right, on Rome, could possibly be a deadly wound, right? It would be well past the fringes of, the frontier between Islam and Christianity. It's well into Christendom. It's the capital of Christendom, right? The Vatican. So if they actually succeeded in their stated goal, it would potentially fulfill exactly what Daniel 11 is talking about. Now, granted, there are, and I want to make this very clear, there are Muslims who are not for violence. There are some who are people of peace. Just like in Christianity, right, there are some who are crusaders and don't actually follow the message of Jesus. So we've got people of peace on both sides, and we've got people of war and bloodshed on both sides. So I want to go back to the Torah and the origins of the Islamic people, right? They claim descent from Ishmael. And I want to talk about where the Torah talks about the hand of Ishmael. So in Genesis 16, and God is speaking to Hagar, and he says, "You shall call his name Ishmael, because Yahweh has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey man, and his hand against the hole, and the hole against him. Among the faces of all his brothers he shall dwell." So he was the first person named by Yahweh. And he legally did receive a double inheritance as the firstborn, even though he was of the unloved wife. So Deuteronomy 21 is very clear that if the firstborn son is of the unloved wife, he still is to receive his double portion. And what do you see today? The lands promised to Abraham. You have Isaac and Jacob receiving the land of what was formerly Canaan, or what you call the Holy Land now today. But the other descendants of Abraham received much greater portion of land, okay, in Arabia, right? That's where the Midianites are from. So they received their inheritance. They still have it to this day, and they get the accompanying oil wealth from it, right? So God made sure that Torah was followed, and that the son of the unloved still received his double inheritance. So there still is a blessing on Ishmael and his descendants because he is a son of Abraham. And some people think that this in Genesis is a derogatory. It's this prophecy tends to be a point of contention between Muslims and Christians and Jews. But what this prophecy is really saying is that Ishmael is going to dwell like a wild donkey in the desert. And when it says among against the faces of his brethren, it means face to face, right? So if you go down to where Abraham lived in Hebron and where Isaac then lived, right? And you look then, those are the mountains of Hebron, and you look across that geologic rift valley, you're looking at mountains on the other side, okay, which is where Ishmael would have lived. So kind of lived face to face across this narrow valley, the Dead Sea Rift Valley. And that's all that this prophecy is saying. But in the middle, it says his hand against the whole and the whole against him. And you'll find in King James that's usually translated as his hand against every man. But the Hebrew word there is kol, meaning whole. So it doesn't say man, it says against the whole. So where else do we see this whole showing up, right? We know that the descendants of Ishmael are used by Yahweh both to advise Moses through Jethro and even oppress Israel when they were in rebellion. So there's kind of this tension, right? Sometimes it's a good tension, sometimes it's a bad tension, but there's this tension between the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael. All right. So what is it talking about, his hand against the whole? Does it mean that, as some Christian commentators will say, that, it's because Ishmael would be a wild man and his descendants would be terrorists? I think there's a little bit different interpretation that we could look at. So remember in Daniel 7, it says, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it and break it in pieces. So the king of the north devours the whole earth, right? And in Revelation, we see, and I saw on one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded. So here we have the deadly wound. And when it's healed, all the world marveled and followed the beast. Okay, so we have a period of time in which the king of the north is devouring the whole earth. It doesn't just do it all at once, right? It's a process. And so as it's devouring the whole earth, something has to oppose the king of the north. Okay, that's the king of the south. And that's exactly the role that Ishmael was prophesied to take. His hand would be against the whole. So the whole world comes against Ishmael. Ishmael is pushing back, and you have the violent, the bloody on the side of Islam, and the violent, the bloody on the side of Christendom, pushing against each other, right? But that is a distraction that allows the people of God to escape, just like it was during the time of the reformers, when Martin Luther said the friend of the Protestants is the Ottoman Empire, because every time the Pope would raise an army to go and attack the reformers, he would have to divert that army to come against the Ottomans. Okay? The idea is that, again, that conflict, you have the violent on both sides pushing against each other, allowing God's people then to continue for a time. Right. So eventually, yes, the king of the north does take over. He does conquer. Right. This is the kind of the idea I want to present you with, and I think that's alluded to in Daniel 11:40 through 45. So let's go ahead and finish reading those verses. Right. So we can check that off our list. We're done reading Daniel 11 after we're done with this slide here. So at the time of the end, the king of the south shall gore him, a deadly wound, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. He shall also enter the countries, overwhelm and pass through. Okay, so here we have the devouring of many countries of the whole world, right? The king of the north is coming in response to this deadly wound. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the chief of the sons of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, not escape. He shall have power over the treasuries of gold and silver, over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. He shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and no one shall help him. So here we have a lot of geographic places that are named, literal places. So first we have an attack by the king of the north, or the king of the south, and then the king of the north responds, takes over many countries, and there's a list of countries that are conquered. Okay, Egypt is mentioned twice, as if it's the most important one, right? You got to understand it took over Egypt. Why? Because Egypt is the seat of the king of the south, right? So that's the capital of the king of the south. In other words, king of the south goes down. Okay. Also, the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. Okay, following at his heels means that they're not conquered, but they are brought into subjection, right? They become allies. So North Africa and represented by the Libyans, and everything south of Egypt represented by the Ethiopians, that joins with Christendom, okay, in the final push against Egypt. We have news from the east and the north, or the northeast, that we talked about a little bit ago. Talk about that again, but I just want to point that out, okay? Eventually, after conquering Egypt and all these many countries, we find that the king of the north goes where? Between the holy seas and the glorious holy mountain, which is where Jerusalem is. Okay, between the Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea, glorious holy mountain, Mount Zion, right? And then we have a few countries that escape, Edom, Moab, and the chief of the sons of Ammon. And we'll talk about that too. There's a major end times conflict that could be associated with the, well, never mind. I'll hold that thought. So the whirlwind response, okay? This is a devastating whirlwind response. We have the king of the north, whose capital may be Rome, maybe some other city. We don't know. The Bible doesn't say specifically, right? But some place is attacked. There's a deadly wound. Somebody dies, and in a literal sense, and the king of the north responds by saying, enough's enough. We're just going to wipe Islam out. And oh, by the way, we also want to have Jerusalem. In other words, take Jerusalem from the Jews too, right? As the stated goal of the Crusaders has always been. So that's where they end up, right? So they take out many countries, including Egypt, okay? And then head off and take Jerusalem as well. So the kingdom of the south is split into three parts. You have the many countries, Egypt and Jerusalem, that are all conquered in kind of this whirlwind fit of anger over the deadly wound. Okay, those are all conquered. You have Libya, North Africa, Kush, which is Sudan and Ethiopia, ally with the king of the north. And then you have this remnant that escapes from the children of Lot and the children of Esau, which is the modern day country of Jordan. So let's talk about that northeast now. Okay, and you've seen this slide before with this map, or a similar slide, I should say, with this map of what would happen if sea levels rose due to all the ice melting, right? And you have that, orbital shift, and the Earth is just slightly closer to the sun, and all the ice melts, and it floods the Dead Sea Valley, this new sea, right? We know that God loves to take people right across the sea and part the sea. So, is that going to happen again? Well, Joel 2:20 says, I will remove far from you the northern army and will drive him away into a barren and desolate land with his face toward the eastern sea and his back toward the western sea. If he's facing the eastern sea and his back is to the western sea, then it's possibly because he's coming from Jerusalem and he's facing the Dead Sea Rift Valley. He's chasing someone. He's chasing the remnant who are trying to get out of Jerusalem and get to the mountains, just like the early Christians did when they fled Jerusalem to go to Pella. So here we see this parallel where the prophecy, final past 3.5 years, right? This abomination, the Roman armies came and surrounded Jerusalem, this abomination of desolation. The Christians get out, flee to the mountains of Pella, right? And here we're talking about the king of the north again, this northern army. We know he conquers Jerusalem at some point, and well, what does he do? He goes off to chase those people who saw his army once again surround Jerusalem. He goes to chase those people off to the northeast towards Pella. And so they're getting ready to cross this new sea, and he's chasing them, but he's destroyed facing that direction, right? And we know that also in Revelation 12, it says, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood, right? So here again, we have the flooding of this Rift Valley at this time. And yet God's people are trying to once again get out of Jerusalem and flee to the northeast. So they've got to cross this, right? So it's being flooded. They're trying to cross it. The king of the north has conquered Jerusalem. He's trying to chase them. I think God's going to part the sea again. And here's why I think that. So those countries that escape, okay, the word escape comes from the Hebrew word malat. In Daniel 11:41, it says, but these shall malat escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the chief of the sons of Ammon. Malat means rescue, deliver, escape, save, or even give birth. Okay, it's used in Isaiah 66 or 67, I forget, to refer to the giving of birth. And we're told, Lot was told, when Sodom was destroyed, escape, malat, for your life, get out quickly, okay? David, over and over again, escaped from Saul, okay? So in each of these instances, right, when Lot escapes, we have the formation of a new kingdom, 2 new kingdoms actually, Moab and Ammon, that come from that escape, right? There's not only a deliverance, but there's a new birth of a new nation at that time. David escapes from Saul and births the Davidic monarchy. Okay, so this isn't just they escaped, end of story. This is they escape, but something new is born. And I think that that something new is the fact that, well, yes, there is a violent component among Islam and a violent component among Christianity, and those two are going to push against each other, that there is going to be a component from the remnant who escaped Jerusalem as the king of the north is coming to surround it, coming from Egypt. All right. If he's coming from Egypt and having conquered Egypt, he's going to be coming from the southwest. So the direction that people would flee would not be that direction. It would be in the exact opposite direction to the northeast, right? And so the king of the north's coming, right? He's wiped out pretty much all the rest of Islam, right? But somehow Jordan has been in the eye of that whirlwind and has kind of escaped from that. And when God's people cross over, Satan is raising the sea levels and, trying to drown them. God provides a way for them to get across, and they meet up with, I believe, people of peace among Muslims, descendants of Lot, children of Abraham and Edom, children of Lot and Moab and Ammon. And together they birth something new. They birth the remnant that goes to the wilderness. Okay. When you go back and you read about Revelation and the woman giving two wings of a great eagle, that exact phrase is found in reference to God bringing the children out of Egypt, the children of Israel out of Egypt to Sinai, specifically Sinai. So when it talks about the wilderness in Revelation, I think it's talking about the wilderness. Okay, again, he's bringing them to Sinai for a final period where he's going to provide for them. This whole imagery of the earth opening its mouth to swallow up the flood and help the women, that earth opening the mouth is the same imagery as the earth opening its mouth to swallow Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Okay, again, extensional geologic setting in which the earth is fracturing and opening up, in this case to help the woman. But that area, right? That area where you see the earth opening up in the Exodus story, I think is the same area where you see the earth opening up in Revelation. So let's talk about a little bit timing. All right, I think all of the seals, trumpets, and bowls, they have the same ending point, the second coming of Jesus. They don't all necessarily start at the same time, but they kind of mingle and end at the same time. Okay, we have a red horse of war. I think that parallels Daniel 11:40. If you're going to wipe out a quarter of Earth's population by taking out Islam as some kind of retribution from a goring attack, you're going to go and you're going to wipe out many countries, right? Islamic countries make up a quarter of the world's population. You're going to wipe those out. That's a pretty significant event, all right? Aptly depicted by a red horse of war, in which we're specifically told that a huge chunk of Earth's population is killed. All right. And then what happens? And what we see in the fifth seal, we see persecution happening. Well, if the king of the north makes his way to Jerusalem and God's people are fleeing, right, there's some persecution right there as he goes to go and try and conquer them, right? So I think the trumpets bowls also begin during this time, somewhere around in here, right? So I think you have that the orbital slip of the Earth, get back on God's calendar, right? At the time that this is happening, you start to see more earthquakes and volcanoes, right? You see the geologic events necessary for this Rift Valley to flood. And then you also see that God uses these geologic events for a reason, for a purpose. One, it's to call the wicked to repentance and demonstrate the power of the Creator. Okay, that's one. But it also helps to show a distinction between the righteous and the wicked. How does it do that? Well, if you have a huge new sea forming between the king of the north and the wicked who have now conquered Jerusalem, and God's people who are now on the wilderness Jordanian side, there's a distinction right there between the righteous and the wicked, a very clear physical distinction in the end days. Right? It also hinders the wicked and protects the righteous. Having a sea through there and then having the fact that there's faults in there and volcanoes along those faults, right? That acts as a fence to protect God's people in the last days. These events can also serve as a guide to kind of, like the nipping of the nipping of a sheepdog at the sheep, right? It doesn't hurt the sheep, but it kind of guides the sheep towards the right place to go, right? So if you've got geologic, if you've got an earthquake over here, you're going to go somewhere else, right? So earthquakes and judgments on the wicked also kind of steer the righteous towards where they need to be in the last days. So there's a lot of reasons for why we're going to see literal geologic events and a literal fulfillment, I think, of these signs in the future. So parallel prophecies, okay, in Daniel and Revelation, each of them are in the context of worldwide conflict, persecution of the saints, final judgment, and salvation. And I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that there's probably no one in this room that would disagree that these prophecies of Daniel and Revelation are parallel, right? So if they're parallel, then the times mentioned in Daniel and the times mentioned in Revelation are also parallel. Okay. The problem is the math doesn't add up. Daniel, you have a times, time, and half a time, or 3.5 years. In Revelation, you have 42 months and 1,260 days, both that are mentioned. So let's take a look at the math here. 1,260 days does not equal 42 months and does not equal 3.5 years. But the prophecies are parallel, so they should be the same, but they're not in a literal sense, right? So how do we resolve this conundrum? Well, you move the Earth's orbit. If you have an orbital slip that sets up all these geologic events, you can also change and bring these time periods into alignment. Okay. As it stands right now, 1 month is 29.52 days. So 42 months is 1,240 days, not 1,260 days. 1 year is 365 and a quarter days. So 3.5 years would be 1,278 days. So we have 1,240 days, 1,260 days, and 1,278 days. And yet these prophetic periods are supposed to be the same, but they're not. Okay. So we can just assume that these prophecies are not the same. That would be one solution. But that would ignore the context of these prophecies. So we can't do that, right? Okay, we could use a quote Jewish or a prophetic calendar of 360 days per year. But the Jewish calendar at the time these prophecies were given had alternating months of 29 and 30 days, which means 354 days a year, not 360. You cannot use a Jewish calendar to resolve this discrepancy. Never has there been a Jewish calendar of 354 days. Now, if you go back to the time of Noah, there was a calendar of 360 days, but Noah wasn't Jewish. Okay, so there's no Jewish calendar of 360 days. So the other thing is you can shorten the number of the days in the year. Well, you'd have to shorten the number of the days and lengthen the days in the month at the same time. Impossible, right? Not if you slip and move Earth's orbit, right? So with men, this is impossible. With God, all things are possible. And in fact, Jesus point blank tells us in Mark 13, and unless the Lord had shortened those days, nor flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened the days. 1,278 days minus 1,260 days is 18 days. There's an 18-day difference between these various prophecies. So how much are the days shortened? 18 days. If you don't shorten the last period on Earth's time by 18 days, no flesh would be saved. This is like the mercy of our God right here. I mean, that's cutting it really close. 18 days, it's not a lot, right? But if God didn't shorten it by that little that little bit, all right, no flesh would be saved. And God, that's his heart. He wants to save people, right? So he's going to give the wicked as much time as possible. And so, what about, changing the rotation of the Earth? Could you do it if you just sped up or slowed down the Earth? Okay. Does it have to be an orbital slip? If you lengthen each day by 21 minutes, okay, you could. If the amount of time the Earth spun, right, if you slowed it down just a little bit, lengthen each day by 21 minutes over the course of the time we're talking about, you could turn 1,260 days into 3.5 years. Okay, so you could do it by changing the rotation of the Earth. Except you would have to slow down the speed of the Earth. And if you slowed down the speed of the Earth, the months would get shorter as well. I gotta say this right. I may not be saying it right. It's better in my book. But the problem is if you just did it by rotating, like by changing the rotation of the Earth and how fast the Earth spin, remember, we had 42 months is 1,240 days, and 3.5 years is 1,278 days. So just changing the rotation of the Earth can't correct both of those things. Okay, because if you speed up the Earth, you're going to fix one and completely mess up the other. If you slow down the Earth, you're going to flip it, right? You can't solve both at the same time. The only way you can solve both at the same time is with the Earth's orbit slipping, which I think is what the prophets tell us and what I talked about in a previous talk, right? So if you move the Earth's orbit closer to the sun and the relationship between the moon and the Earth also change at that same time, then this would work. Okay, I mean, it's a complex interplay here. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just throwing something out there. We'll see. I'm fine waiting to see if it actually happens or not, and maybe something else happens and we'll figure it out then. So based on that, I've kind of looked at this like final time period as, we have the historical method of prophetic interpretation, which takes this day for year principle and it kind of applies, Daniel and Revelation all throughout history. Okay, fine. But what about a literal sense? Okay. You cannot have a literal fulfillment of these events unless the calendar's fixed. Okay. And what a blessing it would be to have a fixed calendar that no one can argue about anymore. You know when, Sukkot is and Passover, no more arguing about that. It would be great, right? Put everyone on God's calendar again. No argument about what, the lunar Sabbath, whatnot, it's fixed. No excuses. All right. So in Daniel 12, right after Daniel 11, it says, "Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335." If you take that as kind of the longest time span, if you think maybe the 2,300 could be because it says evenings and mornings, so you divide that in half because you have one evening and one morning every day, right? So that's 1150. If you assume that they all start at the same time and they all end by Sukkot, right? You've got this final 3.5 year period. And so when the 2,300 end, which I think could be related to the sealing, right? The cleansing of the sanctuary is a cleansing to your body as a temple, right? And so that could be related to the sealing, maybe. I don't know. But the 10th day of the first month, right? That is what kicks off. That's when the lamb was selected, right? So final choice, select the lamb, sealed, and one festival cycle later is when the end of the 1335 is. Maybe. Anyway, I think I'll stop there and open it up for discussion. I hope I've warped some brains a little bit. I like to do that, and then I like to have a good discussion from it. So
This was good. Thank you, Ryan.
absolutely. Thank you, Angela.
I have a quick question on the 368, 65 days. I don't personally understand how that would fix everybody's calendar because they all think differently. I mean, some go by barley, some go by things that have nothing to do with that. So I don't think it would fix everything. But one of them is, what is it you say, Brent? One's observed and one's
Prophetic.
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 And that's what makes a difference. If it went back to 360,
Mhm.
yep. But I don't know what 18 days is going to matter anyway by the time we get that far. It's here one way or the other. But that was very interesting. I also have a quick question on King of the North, King of the South. You
Mhm.
seem to say that it's Egypt, which is fine. However, there's never been a king or pharaohs and all kinds of, they were never called king from what I understand. So would it just
Yeah.
be leader of Egypt?
I think the word is monarch. So I do think that Pharaoh is referred to as a king, or I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at that, but
The Bible keeps saying
it's
king, and I'm like, okay. But yeah, that was all
Yeah.
very interesting. I'm trying, poor Keith, you guys gotta feel sorry for Keith because I'm forever asking him this, that, and the other, and he tries his hardest to explain, and it still goes over my head. Same with Brent.
Yeah.
I'm sure they get
Well,
an
you
email
know,
and go again.
Ryan, I did a whole thing on Revelation 13 where it says continue 42 months. We have the Seventh-day Adventist Church takes that continue out and puts the 42 months before the wound, but it says it will continue after the wound. I did a whole program on that where I showed that it's going to be future application, that what happened in 1996 wasn't that accurate. It was actually 1808 when they was really wounded. But people
Yeah.
don't talk about that. And also today, Israel, or I should say Jerusalem, is controlled by the Vatican.
Mhm.
It was Barry Cormish when he was still alive, and I met him at a conference. Went up and talked to him about it. He said this was 20 years ago. Back then, that 50% of the holy sites in Jerusalem was controlled and run by the Vatican. And you remember the prime minister, not the prime minister, but the president that was killed in the 1990s in Israel? He was
Yes.
assassinated.
I think was that
He
Ariel
was a
Sharon?
Jesuit. Yeah, he was a Jesuit, and he ran to the Vatican and told the Vatican everything that was going on all the time in Israel. And that came from Barry Cormish.
Wow.
Yeah, see, I think it just shows that Israel currently is in another alliance with Rome, and it's not
Yes.
going to turn out well, right? Because I mean, even evangelical Christianity believes that the Antichrist is going to come and sit in the temple in Jerusalem, right? I don't take that
Yeah.
approach, but I do believe that the King of the North will conquer Jerusalem because that's what we've seen, and they've already
Yes.
set the stage for it.
Who is king of the North?
Well, I believe it, transitioned down through history, and it could be the papacy in the future. But again, I'm not too hung up on the name. A title's a title.
I know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think
Oh,
Ron.
and then if somebody hits somebody, what's going on? Right
Yeah.
now, you're like, oh, does that have anything to do with the end? Go ahead,
Yeah.
Ron. Sorry.
You had mentioned about the God's people fleeing from Jerusalem. How did they get there? What brought them there?
That's my big question, right? And because I'd like to know, I obviously don't want to be in Jerusalem when the King of the North is there. And yet it does seem like there will be, if it's either the people that are just there because they're there, just like it was for the early Christians. I mean, there were Christians all over, but the people that were there had to get out, right? Or maybe God brings his people to Jerusalem and then takes them into the wilderness from there. That may be a rendezvous point. I don't know. It
The
just really,
reason
I
that's
haven't found that.
interesting to me, when I was young, my brother had a dream of crossing over like a pilgrimage to Jerusalem on dry land. And
Yeah, interesting.
I always wondered about how could that happen?
Yeah. Yeah, well,
Well,
there are
like
people
what you
that talk about second Exodus, you'll find like some messianic teachers like Monty Judah and stuff teach on that, you know, God's going to part the Atlantic and people are going to cross, you know, all the way over there on dry land. I'm like, I don't really see the need for that in this modern age, but you know, a small, you know, just crossing the pretty much the exact same sea. It's the same Rift Valley, right? That Dead Sea transitions into the Red Sea. That valley is just above sea level in places, some places below sea level, but it'd be virtually the same thing he's already done.
Mhm. I like what you said about the King of the North. Focus on the characteristics, not the title. So that's
Yeah.
something important that to think about. And also the word of God says, except those days be shortened, no flesh shall be saved. So
Yeah.
we know that the time has to be cut short.
Yeah.
When it says no flesh will be saved, is that talking physically or mentally?
Well, if you recall from my previous talks, I talk about how you have an undoing of creation throughout the prophecies of the last days, even to the point where the atmosphere is stripped away. And so the whole idea of pulling in the geologic, you know, you have this orbital shift, and then that sets this geologic chain of events in motion that eventually culminates in the complete destruction of Earth being able to sustain life, right? At some point, you're going to be within a few days
Well, yeah, but there
of
are people
total
already dead
annihilation.
that are, there are people that are already dead that are going to be saved. So
Well, yes,
I just
yes.
thought that
Right.
meant that a lot of people will just be so they will go the wrong way. They won't believe it anymore. But maybe I'm wrong.
No, I agree.
Well, we
Like, I don't think we're talking about the dead here. I think when it says no flesh will be saved, I think we're talking about the people who are alive at the time, right?
right
Because obviously
because
the people who are already dead are going to be resurrected and
Mhm.
saved, right? But the people who are alive have to be saved before they're killed from these natural consequences.
we are told Satan
I,
will be on this planet alone for 1,000 years.
Yes. Yeah.
That's no flesh.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people actually don't see that, don't believe that, forget about that. I'm not even sure how to put it because I've had a couple of discussions. I'm like, don't forget that Satan's going to be bound to this earth for 1,000 years. Because a lot of the Jewish Christians or just Christians that believe Jewish way believe Islam is the Antichrist, and they believe that the 1,000 years will be here on earth, and we will be people will be rulers, or they will be rulers, which is not biblically accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's the common idea out there, and the idea that you know Earth is desolate for 1,000 years is very much unique.
Yeah.
And yet, when you look at you know the counter Reformation, this whole idea that Islam is the Antichrist really goes back to the counter Reformation. I mean, specifically, they didn't say Islam is the Antichrist back then, but they laid the framework for this futurist interpretation in the Bible prophecy. And that futurist interpretation has evolved to the point today where they've deflected entirely the king of the north onto the king of the south, right? It's gone from being the king of the north as papal-led Christianity to, oh, now it's actually Islam. And yeah, that doesn't work.
Well, I said that from in Daniel 8 that there's a lot of people don't talk. There's 4 verses there, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 9, 10. There's 4 verses, and it's after the second the he goat, that horn that gets broken, 4 come up, and out of them or one of them is the little horn. We've always referred to that as the Vatican, and it says it goes down south and east to Jerusalem, to the Pleasant Land, which is Jerusalem. And I've said that for years.
Yeah.
And it's the one that takes the deity away. It's the one that sets up the abomination of desolation. And it's the one that causes all the problems in the sanctuary,
Exactly.
which is
Yeah.
what the Seventh-day Adventist Church used to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, what better way to take over Jerusalem, but to convince the whole world that Islam is the Antichrist so that it can wipe Islam out.
That's true.
Right. And I think if you angered Christendom enough with a goring, it would do just that, right? I mean, look what happened just after 9/11, right? We went in and we, destabilized a lot of countries with the blessing of the Pope, and ISIS, go after them, take out ISIS, the Pope condoned that. And so if you have something like, the Pope getting killed again, or the president of the US getting taken out, or the King of England getting taken out, all right, that's deadly wound. I mean, what are we going to do? Christianity is going to go nuts if something like that happens. And wow, not only do we have a pope, it's an American pope, right? I mean, talk about just lining things up for that. So going back to this idea of prophetic and literal, right? So you have the prophetic and the historicist, the day year principle, and that's all fine and good. But then I think you also have to look at the literal as well. So you gotta look at both and go, okay, these prophecies may have been fulfilled in the past, right? 1798, however you want to interpret that, right? But as you pointed out, Keith, the deadly wound is after the 40, it is before the 42 months, and Adventists have always interpreted it as after the 42 months. So we've got to look at something other than just this historical prophetic, and we've got to look for, I think, a future literal that has that in the correct order.
Yeah, the person that I forget his name that did the capture, when I first heard this, there's a book that he wrote. It's a bibliography, which I went and got. I went and found it and bought it. And it's one of those books that you really can't read very well because it's all facts, data, 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 data. But and he's very, very clear in there exactly what he did. And the reason he did that was to control Britain, because Britain was a Catholic nation. If you can control the Catholic Church, then the Catholic Church will control Britain, which didn't happen so well.
Yeah. It's when I watched one, it wasn't the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. It was like the third or fourth one. It's where Johnny Depp meets with King George. And it was very fascinating to me that King George, he's the head of the Church of England. And yet one of his titles in the movie, as they're introducing him, was something having to do with being the guy who controlled the purse strings of the Catholics, the Vatican. Like he was the, arch treasurer or something like that. And I was like, really? Were the kings of England actually given that authority, even though they are not Catholic these days, technically? Like
one of the PowerPoints that I did was, and I showed the Tower of Babel, the picture of the old one. Then I showed that the Bank of International Settlements, it's round, just like that. And the Bank of the Vatican is round. They all look the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it came from an article, Who Controls the Bank of International Settlements? And he referred to there, it was run and controlled by the Vatican.
Brent, you're very quiet. I'm sure you have things to say.
I was thinking about, well, I was doing the final editing this last week on the book, and there's a new part that I added, but I was going to mention that right now, but it'll wait for another time. But I do believe it's very important to understand the difference between the times that God tells us to observe, including the difference between a prophetic year and a observed year. And I believe was there easily could have been a time in the past, as Ryan's pointed out a few times, where the rotation was 360 days, and it went off kilter, and maybe a time where it's going to be coming back to that. And so in between time, you have these prophetic years that only in a certain period of history are they observed years, but God kept his calendar with prophetic years. And so I think it's very important, and I think it's not a coincidence, the number too, like right at the 69th year, a prophetic year becomes or observed, 69 observed years becomes 70 prophetic. So, I think it's and when you talk about people being in Jerusalem or in the wilderness or whatever, in some ways, all of history of God's people, we were all in the wilderness. We were all as covenant people. Paul talks about the baptism and different things through us being in the wilderness. We don't all have to physically be there at one time, even if just a portion even if just one family is there, then then everybody feels everybody's part of that. So that there could be some group of Christians that is literally in the wilderness, and those that aren't literally in the wilderness are very much aware that they're in the wilderness and very much part of the experience without being there. So I think we just have to be open to what God's going to show us, because I really do believe more than ever that time is near, and that the signs are going to become more and more overt. And I do believe prophecy. And I appreciate the way Ryan ties in Daniel and Revelation, because they are the same thing. They're different books, but they're books given to the prophets, given to so that we would see the obvious connection between the two, and we would see there was a one. And anyway, so I think the signs are getting clearer. I think the time is very important. I do believe that the 360 prophetic years are going to be more and more important into watching the fulfillment of things. And I really appreciated Ryan's presentation. So
Thank you, Brent.
I should be able to send this stuff out to you by tomorrow, Ryan.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm in that part where you have to do figure 1, chapter 9, figure, like all the kind of the boring part, but just getting all my tables in there and all that sort of stuff. So, but yeah.
What time is it, Ryan? It's 11:30 here.
It's 7:30 here. So we had a good Shabbat, and we're getting ready, gearing up to start the week.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Ryan. That was wonderful.
Absolutely.
Great information explaining things. There's so much to it.
Just trying to throw out another way to look at it. There could be a lot of different ways it could be fulfilled, and if we've got different ideas on our radar, then maybe one of them will stick when the time comes.
Well,
When you say 18 minutes, I wish it was a lot more than that. Like a few years. Come tomorrow.
Right. I think that what this is showing us is that there's going to be signs that will kick off kind of this final 3.5 years. I think we're going to see a big war. We're going to see the horsemen of Revelation riding in a very big way. And then once we get through that, then the remnant can be protected in the wilderness for the final final time when it's really bad, and that everything's just going nuts, and eventually be rescued at the end of it.
Everybody's always trying to say, oh, this happened, so it means this. Oh, this is happening, so oh, this. And my dad would always shake his head and say, please study prophecy, just study, pray, and when things happen, you will know where you are, but don't jump ahead. So they will go see something that's about to happen, or, people are making a big deal about, I guess the president's May 15th having a prayer specialty to put the White House and America, one nation under God. Well, they've done that before too. I don't know that that means anything. It might, but, just all kinds of things are going on. We just need to wait until we see, the major things like you're talking about, and we know that that's coming.
But Mrs. White tells us very clearly that it's because of catastrophes. That's
Right.
why the National Sunday Law will come in.
Right.
Yep. So an interplay between what's going on in the natural world and the spiritual.
That's what Ryan can tell us because he knows all about that.
Yeah.
All the stuff.
Well, I mean, people are going to freak out, and they're going to want to appease the deity, right? Because these natural catastrophes, I mean, that's been going on since people were sacrificing their children in order to get rain for their crops, right? So, all these events, these environmental things are happening to us. We must honor Sunday sacredness. And if we have to sacrifice a few Sabbath keepers along the way, well, it'll just make God happy and he'll bless us again.
Okay, Ryan,
Bill, are you there?
this is a random thing off the topic of what people are talking about, but in your screen, your slide, the one that's Daniel's pattern, that's I guess a carving on a wall where they're looting the sanctuary, it looks like.
Yeah, it's it's Titus's Arch of Triumph in Rome, and they carved the menorah and the two trumpets and the table of showbread on there.
Hold on, I'm just writing that down. What it's called? What is that one? That little square with the two little like triangles that looks almost like a dual-ended camera. Old camera.
Yeah,
what is that?
That's what I thought when it looked like a camera.
Like, wow, that's high tech dual-ended cameras. Front and back.
Yeah. Let's see here. We're talking about this right here.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're talking about this right here.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that is just a standard of the legions. I think that's a legionary standard to signify which legion or centurion they belong to. I'm thinking. I'm not sure exactly.
Looks like a
It's
wrapped
like
candy.
like a banner.
Yeah.
Like candy.
Because there's a couple of them. There's one over there up at the front.
There's
the other
On
one.
the left.
Yeah,
this one
that
here.
end.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the Ark of the Covenant that they have in the box with the. I don't know. Yeah,
So no, this box right here is the table of showbread.
Oh, table of showbread. Okay.
Yep, because it was on the table of showbread that they would attach the two silver trumpets and carry those by that. And you can see one of the utensils sitting on top of it, and there's no angels on it. And also the dimensions, we know that that's the table of showbread. So.
Okay.
Could they have been picketers? Those look like picket signs.
So does the Bible say they carried the table of showbread with the two trumpets, or?
I believe that they made fasteners on there. It may not be in the Bible where you find that. Might be in the Talmud somewhere.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for explaining. I just thought that looked like some old two-ended, double-ended camera.
Yeah.
By that time, the Ark of the Covenant was lost. It was hidden.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara. Yes, it was hidden by
Jeremiah, right?
Jeremiah.
So just after the time of Hezekiah.
Okay.
In the Maccabees, it talks about hiding it in a cave.
Yeah.
And according to Ron
I had
White,
it on one of my things, and then it also says that somebody went and tried to mark the way so that he could go back into there, and he was slapped on the hand for that. Well, my term,
Oh.
slapped on the hand. He wasn't
Wasn't
supposed to
it-
be doing that.
Slapped on the hand like Uzzah?
Wasn't it according to Ron Wyatt that the temple was made with slots so that if somebody came, the Ark of the Covenant could be sent down into the caves underneath? That's what I've heard.
Well,
So that's why he was able to find it down there.
there was when I was in there in that cave, when you first walk in, there's a plaque. And Ron Wyatt said that plaque was removed and it's over in some museum originally, and they put another plaque up there. But he believes that that plaque that was removed may have been what that guy put in there to mark the way. But we don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I've heard that the U.S. government knows exactly where the Ark of the Covenant is because of the astral projections and the mediums that they've employed, and so they've seen it in a room and heard people talking in Arabic or some Middle Eastern language outside and around it, so they know about where it is.
Again, we have no idea.
yeah,
There were Ethiopians that came and said that they had it, and they were Jews from way back then, and there's a very good chance they went and stole it. I don't have any idea. I don't know that it really matters.
kind of like
No.
Keith just mentioned, that one guy who says don't listen to them because it's all satanic, those mediums and all those astral projections. And I think
Yeah.
the Lord would keep it safe until it needs to be revealed.
Yep.
Because I think the 10 Commandments, Sister White says the 10 Commandments were going to be revealed at the end, whatever time frame that is.
I don't know if they're going to be revealed to prove to people, because you should study and believe it, but it might be at the very end to say, hey, there it is. We tried to tell you, but I don't know. And again, I don't know that we need to know. It'll happen when it happens.
Well, there's some people like Thomas that have to see it to believe it. Because Christ says, there is people that have not seen, his wounds in his hand and believe it. But there is some people, and I know that's one of the things that Ron Wyatt said when I was over there. He said that some people have to, to see the evidence themselves to believe it. And if they ask, God will provide it. And I believe that may be what happens at the time of the end. When the doubters, he will show them. It's like Ryan said, there may be another Red Sea crossing. That would show some of these things, the doubters, that these things have happened in the past and that they happen now. God will provide for his people.
I just think it's a really good, not just a study, but just a good map, and to have it in writing. You never know when you have to dust off the old maps and bring them out again in the future and go, okay, what was that about? When you see these different things happening. So,
Right.
And I agree with Ryan where the title is more important than the specific,
characteristic.
So-and-so or whatever. But yeah, they're very appreciated, and thank you.
It's an exciting time to live, and I know we'll see him soon, but I could just picture my dad sitting on here. He would have such a big grin on his face. He'd just be so happy, so fascinated.